Thank you all for joining us for the 2 kinds of writing groups and how to set them up workshop. Joining us today is Emily Faloro from the Writing Center. So I'm going to hand it over to Emily to get us started. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you so much, Navina. Hi, everyone. Like Navina said, my name is Emily Favaloro. I work at the Writing Center on campus. Of course, not actually on campus these days, but I'm here to give you guys a presentation on writing groups. The title's a little bit different, but I promise you it's the same. It's the same concept. It has been changed as far as I know. I didn't have time to warn everybody beforehand, but it is exactly what Navita said. We are going to be talking about kinds of writing groups and how to go about them, how to start them, what they encompass, and yeah. So let's get started. Excuse me while I share our PowerPoint for today. Okay, can everybody see that? If you could type in the chat and let me know, that'd be really great. Awesome, thank you so much. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about how to set up a writing group and the different kinds of writing groups. We know grad school can be really, really stressful, and that your demand for your respective programs can seem overwhelming. But fortunately, there are enough resources that you can use to help you through your trying times at grad school, especially when it comes to writing. And one of the resources to consider is a writing group. Today, we'll talk a little bit about what a writing group is and how joining one can motivate and encourage you to meet your program's writing demands. So let's talk a little bit about that. My computer was, there we go, sorry. In today's workshop, we will define writing groups, so what they are, what you can expect from them, or what are the usual expectations, as well as discuss some of the positive research results that studies have recorded about writing groups over the years. We will also learn about the different types of writing groups, and we will identify the benefits of writing groups, as well as share the potential downfalls of writing groups, because with everything, there are pros and cons. We will outline the first steps to creating a writing group, as well as identifying habits of successful writing groups and how you can participate in that. So first, we're going to talk about what is a writing group, or what are writing groups. So a writing group, or a writing circle, as you sometimes may hear it called, is an informal meeting of writers to support, encourage, provide tips, and peer review academic writing and publications. The goal and agendas of writing groups are often agreed upon prior to the start of the writing group, so before you even meet the first time, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, of course, later on in this presentation. Of course, scholarly research actually does support the benefits of writing groups in academia. For example, one study found that successful writing groups have been approached as a way of developing research potential and supporting writing for publication amongst academic staff, such as graduate students who struggle with low publication rates. If a writing group is well planned and all of the group members agree to commit their time, writing groups can improve everything from research argument development to overall writing quality and quantity. So a little bit more simply put, writing groups are groups of writers that meet regularly to draft, plan, edit, revise, and work on individual or personal writing projects. So we do all of these things both on an individual level or in a group, depending on if the people in your group are part of your respective program or not. Many times, members of writing groups have entirely separate writing projects or individual goals. Writing groups can be a great support system for the individual needs of a group member, because sometimes we just need a little push, and having others around to help motivate you to keep writing, even on an individual level, is always nice. Writing groups can keep writers writing consistently and support their writing needs with anything from motivation to constructive criticism and peer review. And remember, anyone can join or form a writing group, even if they're not in your discipline or not in your program, as long as it feels right to you and everybody is comfortable in your group. some things that we want to talk about is some of the scholarly advantages and benefits of writing groups. So research by Davis, Provost, and Major suggests that writing groups provide help for writers through the writing process to get their work to publication, improvement to scholarship, both in quantity and quality. They help teach empathy for other writers. They provide collaboration and networking opportunities for future projects. They teach professional accountability when the group requires group writing deadlines. And of course, research suggests that writing groups help develop research by providing additional perspectives throughout the writing process, which we'll talk a little bit about in our next slide and what that means. So a really big advantage to using a writing group that research suggests is that if you have people from other disciplines in your writing group, you receive more benefits than just people who are also in your discipline or in your program. So research suggests that interdisciplinary writing groups, or groups made up of writers from multiple disciplines, yield the most benefits. For example, writers from different disciplines approach research and publication in different ways. They can help provide information in different ways and find gaps in logic or information in ways the writer from the same discipline may overlook. They can, in this case, if you are an English major like I was and you want a different perspective, you might be in a writing group with people who are like psychology majors or history majors, and it's always nice to see how they might approach the same topic or even the same writing conventions that you have, because everybody approaches it just a little bit differently. And then, of course, having a fresh pair of eyes is always nice. Having somebody to look at work that you've been staring at for hours and give you a fresh perspective is always nice to have after you're tired and on your fourth coffee of the day. It's important to note, however, that just because interdisciplinary groups seem to yield the most benefits, it does not mean that a writing group in general, has poor results. The research of Mar et al. Shows that smaller groups tend to be more successful, even if a larger group is broken up into smaller groups. So doing so eliminates tension and balances time between writers. So if you're looking to have multiple people across different disciplines, it's still beneficial for you to have all those people, but maybe you might want to break them down into smaller groups. So that way you have enough focus time on everybody in the smaller groups and you're yielding the most out of the time. So finally, writing groups have been proven to yield better results when the goal of the group and the meetings the goals of the group and meeting procedures have been outlined prior to the first meeting. So again, I talked a little bit about this when we were first talking about writing groups, but we'll continuously bring this up throughout the rest of this presentation, and we will talk a little bit more about it in advance in a moment. So some more advantages of writing groups. Not only are these things backed by scholarly research, but of course there are some just advantages that people get out of spending time with other people in their disciplines or other people in academia as well. And these are a sense of community and support between fellow writers. It's always nice to meet somebody who also wants to tear their hair out while writing their PhD or their thesis or dissertation. They provide ongoing feedback throughout the writing process. Writing groups improve upon feedback skills when you're required to provide feedback, which we'll talk a little bit about what that means in a minute. It provides experience working with criticism to practice working with constructive criticism. I know criticism can seem overwhelming, especially when you're getting it from multiple sources, such as your mentors and peers, but a writing group, especially a smaller one, does help with receiving that criticism and what to do with it. Writing groups also provide an opportunity for regular revision. So if you guys feel like you don't have enough time or stressed, having a deadline for regular revision and having that fresh pair of eyes is also really helpful. Writing groups also inspire writers to produce a better quality of work. You also have writing groups that give you education on writing tactics or topics you may not usually approach. As like I said earlier, a lot of people approach writing in different ways, and that's totally fine. Writing groups also increase your output of scholarship, and they motivate writers to write at the highest level possible. Because whether or not you feel like you're competitive, most people do get competitive, even in writing groups, and they feel the need to constantly keep up with the deadlines and with other people in their group, and that helps motivate a lot of people. So we talked about all these advantages. We've defined what a writing group is. Well, how do we go about picking one, or how do we go about starting one? So establishing a writing group isn't too bad, isn't too hard, but there are some things that you want to do before you get started. So it's important to know that successful writing groups have clear goals for the group, goals on the individual member level, and also goals for each session that they meet up. These goals want to be clear. You want to make them clear. You want to have a clear communication channel between each members early on, so that way everybody knows the goals before coming in, as well as you want to create a regular meeting schedule and keep a consistent format for group meetings. So it's very predictable and dependable to come into each meeting and know what a writer is going to be doing, what you're going to be discussing, and things that you may have been looking forward to since the last meeting. And finally, of course, in order to do these, we have defined group titles, or defined groups of writing groups themselves. So we have the accountability group, feedback groups, and hybrid groups. So these are the three main types of writing groups that you will come across. And let's talk a little bit more about each of those. So the first one we have are accountability groups. Sorry, did I miss one? No, cool. All right. First type of writing group we have are accountability groups. Accountability groups are, just as the name suggests, their main goal is to keep writers accountable. With accountability groups, they meet regularly with a consistent format for each meeting, such as, perhaps each meeting is 30 minutes of required writing time with weekly check-ins to keep people motivated. Accountability groups also help individuals get into the habit of regular writing because of their consistent schedule. So regular meetings, such as once a week, means regular weekly writing, regular weekly deadlines that you have to meet, and the motivation to keep writing. Accountability groups also aid individuals in establishing good writing habits and hold them accountable for keeping them. For example, a session might conclude with group members setting a writing goal to complete between meetings. So maybe your group goals will require 2 pages of revision and 3 pages of new writing, or you would establish a certain limit, or I guess maximum or minimum, of what people should meet by the time you meet next. And then finally, accountability groups are not feedback groups. They do not provide feedback. The goal of this writing group isn't to criticize or influence the actual research or writing. It is simply to hold writers accountable for producing new material. Of course, there is scholarly research on how to set up an accountability group. And if you're thinking about starting an accountability writing group, we have a little guideline for you here in case you were looking what an average accountability group looks like, how each meeting might go. So a meeting with an accountability group might look like this. For the first 15 minutes of the meeting, each group member will report on prior week's writing goals. So anything that you established at the end of last meeting, you would bring up in the first 15 minutes. You would discuss the limitations and identify techniques on how to improve for the next week. And they may also plan the agenda for the day's meeting, right? You may discuss what you want to get accomplished in the next 45 minutes if you're meeting for an hour. The middle section of the meeting would be timed individual writing to keep group members on track for weekly goals. And then the final 15 minutes would be spent reviewing challenges and accomplishments of the brief writing session, ending with setting personal writing goals for the following week. So you have your 30 minutes of individual writing, and then your final 15 would be reflecting on those 30 minutes and deciding where you want to go into for the next week. So that's essentially what an accountability group looks like. We'll move on to our second type of group, which is a feedback group. So unlike an accountability group, feedback groups focus more on peer review and collaborative opportunities. Much like an accountability group, they meet regularly and consistently, as all writing groups should, to keep that motivation and habit of good writing going. For example, group members might regularly submit writing on a rotating schedule prior to the meeting to receive feedback from other members. You can, if any of you have been in a writing workshop, this is kind of the most similar to that. So a feedback group meetings might consist of member comments or previously submitted work. In a collaborative workshop setting like a feedback group, most of the session is spent on giving feedback to revision and editing strategies while improving the writing and feedback quality of all the group members. Keep in mind, though, with feedback groups, sessions will be more productive if writing is submitted prior to each meeting on a rotating schedule. The less time that is spent in session on reading, the more time you have on writing and providing constructive criticism for your group members. This group is the most successful when time is divided evenly between group members' submissions, such as if you meet for an hour a week, you may rotate through 8 group members' work, spending half an hour on each, meaning that each member would get one 30-minute session every 4 weeks. More information on feedback groups on how they would look for a typical session. So if a feedback group is something that is important to you as a writer or something you would like from a writing group, you might want to consider setting one up, much like these. If you intend to meet for 1 hour, you must first decide how much time you would like to devote to each member of the group. 20 to 30 minutes is quite a while, and the group can accomplish quite a lot in just a short period of time, especially if you've read the material beforehand. One suggestion is to split the time between 2 group members, giving each group member a half an hour to discuss their work with the group. You may even want to split that time between developmental feedback, which is planning for future writing within the scope of that project, and evaluative feedback, which is intended to improve the current state of the draft. If not, if 30 minutes is too long, perhaps 20-minute sessions for each group member split into 10-minute focus sessions on developmental and evaluative feedback might work better. Regardless of how you intend to break up your group's time, make sure it is agreed upon and understood by all group members up front. You want to set hard deadlines for submissions and create a feedback rotation that you will stick to, so that way each member is not confused every time you go into a meeting. Finally, with feedback groups, I just mentioned a little bit briefly when we talked about it in the last slide about the different kinds of feedback. So it's important to understand that there are 2 types of feedback, especially when it comes to feedback groups. The first is developmental or formative feedback, which looks to improve future writing and overall learning and understanding. Developmental feedback sets goals and steps to follow in producing an individual product or project. This feedback tends to focus on argumentative development to apply to all of your future writings, as well as it's the most helpful in the early stages of the writing process rather than deep into revisions. When it comes to developmental feedback, we focus more on global concerns on how a writer may change their habits or things that they focus on a bigger level for future writings. Whereas evaluative or summative feedback looks to give feedback on the piece at hand. So this feedback looks back at the piece of writing and assesses the strengths and weaknesses of that writing. It provides a clear set of steps to revise writing further along in the writing process. So something that you may look for during revision rather than at the early stages compared to developmental feedback. The intention of evaluative feedback is for improving work already written and focuses feedback on issues like grammar and error correction. This feedback is most useful in later stages of the writing project, getting closer to finalizing your draft and submitting it. So this might be something you focus on in a more polished or close to polished piece that you might consider, submitting for publication or things like that. Overall, we tend to get too much evaluative feedback and not enough developmental feedback when it comes to writing. It is possible to plan for the writing group to provide both types of feedback. However, groups should focus on providing specific, concrete developmental feedback to each other to improve and to simplify the writing process for a particular project. Later in this presentation, we'll go a little bit more in depth on the different kinds of feedback. But right now, this is just kind of a little amendment to what we were just talking about. Now, our final type of writing group is a hybrid group. And much like the name suggests, it combines elements of both the accountability group and feedback group. So not only do they require accountability and writing content, they also meet to discuss on how to improve individual work. Hybrid groups generally meet regularly with a consistent format for each meeting. They combine elements of accountability and feedback groups, meaning they might combine elements of how much each individual time is spent on feedback and how much it is spent on writing. But these should be agreed upon before your first session. So how much time you spend with the accountability portion and how much time you spend with the feedback portion should all be settled before you even meet for the first time. These hybrid groups allow members freedom to construct a group that works for them, their writing habits, and their comfort levels. Each hybrid group can look however the collective group members need it to look. So this is probably the most adaptable group, meaning, if you're looking for a specific type of time period, or if you're looking to spend half of your time writing and half your time getting feedback, then this is the kind of group you might shoot to construct or form. A little bit more about hybrid groups and what they would look like. So as long as all of the group members agree on a format, your hybrid group can look however works best for you and your group. A 1-hour meeting may look something like this, where in the opening 10 minutes, you should check in with your group and continue holding them accountable for producing quality work. In the middle of the session, you will likely want to focus on giving feedback. You might try to split the time evenly between all group members workshopping each day. You don't want to overwhelm yourself with too many members, so you want to focus, on giving enough feedback that you don't burn yourself out or burn out your writers quickly. You also want to prepare for that by limiting the number of drafts you discuss each meeting. Again, all of this should be agreed on beforehand. And then your last 10 minutes should be devoted to setting goals and concerns for the following week. This is also time to discuss the upcoming schedule and meeting locations. So if things change, hybrid groups are the most adaptable to kind of giving wiggle room into if meeting places change or goals might change, how you might set things differently. Those last 10 minutes are pretty valuable for a hybrid group. Now, when it comes to actually giving effective feedback, we want to talk a little bit about understanding what it means to give that feedback and what it might look like and how we might help others give that feedback to their group members. Because giving feedback is understandably intimidating, but with careful consideration, giving feedback can help both the reviewer and the person being reviewed. So giving good feedback looks a little bit like this. We'll talk a little bit about how you might approach it. So feedback, both developmental and evaluative, should be concrete and provide guidance not only on how to improve the current assignment, but how to improve future writings as well. Remember, you shouldn't be their line editor. You want to find global concerns and patterns in their work. So looking for bigger issues than if they have a comma placement problem. You want to help your fellow reviewer or writer identify those patterns and give them tips to revise and avoid those patterns in the future. Next, you might try to offer suggestions. You think about how you learn best, right? And maybe you would give some examples of what you're thinking about on how you might approach this topic or how you might approach distribution. Can the writers make a point clear? You might try asking questions to get them to think beyond what is on their paper. So things like, what would happen if these two paragraphs were moved or swapped? Would the flow change? Would the argument become clearer? You might try asking questions just to offer the suggestions that you're looking for, or try to see where their mind is and help them develop revisions through that process. Effective feedback also includes pointing out what is working and what is not, which is often the hardest part. We talk about giving feedback being intimidating, and this is usually where people have a problem. So the best way to do this is by giving your peer a compliment sandwich. So what we mean by that is to start off by something they've done well. You want to give them a compliment on something that worked, something that looks good, and then you would transition into something that needs a little work, something that they might want to focus on in the future, right, with their developmental feedback. And then finally, you want to finish with another strength. By giving them a compliment sandwich, you make the negative portion seem less glaring and that you're not focusing only on what needs to be worked on. You're also giving them praise for what they've done well. So not only do we do this, we also have other things when talking about feedback. So again, to be a little bit more gentle with your group, here are some suggestions or things that you can do. Feedback isn't necessarily about finding what is wrong with a piece of writing. You want to, be a little bit thoughtful of that. You're not trying to correct what they're doing. It's important to find what is working in a piece to help a writer, but not necessarily what you think is wrong. You want to ask a lot of questions. Asking lots of questions allows the writer to engage with their own work in a different way. When they do this, they are considering their own work in ways that they haven't seen it before, often leading to a stronger final product. Feel free to ask. The one thing that we love to work on at the Writing Center is what the writer intended for things. If something isn't clear, ask them what they mean, what were they trying to do, what was their end goal, because a lot of the time how they will explain it to you will come off a lot better than what they have on their page, because they've been stressing about it and writing it for the last however many weeks, months, days. And of course, you want to be kind. Don't forget, kindness includes honesty. However, don't be afraid to speak about an issue in the text, but remember that, to do it in a kind way. Remember that a writer's mentors or professors will not be afraid to speak up about an issue. And if moderated well, a writing group can be more sensitive to a writer's needs. So if you do find something in the text that you want to bring up, which of course you should, just try to be nice about it as much as possible. Be gentle. Some tips for starting a writing group. Now that we've looked at the different kinds and talked about giving feedback, let's go over a few tips about writing groups and how to make them as successful as possible. First, you need to be honest about your needs. Everyone in the group needs to be on the same page from the start, or the individual needs of the writers could be overlooked. Now, I mentioned earlier that a writing group is not only, you should not only be setting goals for the group, but you should be setting individual goals as a writer. It's for individual help, but in a group setting. Second, remember that you are not your writing. This is always a problem when it comes to writers, including myself. Criticism hurts more than it needs to, especially in someone without experience in it. So be sure that you and your group members understand that you are not your writing. It is not an extension of yourself or your intelligence. Keeping that in mind will help ease members into accepting constructive feedback. Remember, no one is criticizing you or your intelligence when they are talking about your writing. It is not you. You are not your writing. Two different things. Next, remember that no one's first drafts are good, not even a little bit. There's no reason you should feel like you've had something perfectly done after one draft. Everyone struggles to get their thoughts on paper. Writing is a skill and an art. So just like anything, some people seem to find writing easier than others, and practice improves your ease of production. So try to avoid comparing yourself to your group members. You are different writers with different processes and different sets of skills. So again, everyone works at all times. If I want to, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the chat. If I want to initiate the writing group, do I have to write the confidential agreement to avoid any conflict issues in the future? So when it comes to writing groups, you want to at least set boundaries or set certain goals. I'm not necessarily it's not necessarily something that you want to I guess it's not necessarily involving conflict, but it is something that you want to avoid, just so that way you're not wasting your meeting time prepping for the next session, or prepping for the session you're about to have, or wasting time with getting everybody on the same page. So yes, I guess the short answer would be yes, you want to write some sort of agreement ahead of time, so that way everyone knows going into each session what it should generally look like. Now, again, if you have clear communication with your group members, and if something changes, then you'd want to let them know right away. Of course, some things are unavoidable, and it's not something you can plan for. But having a sort of set schedule of what each session would look like, or what a session would typically look like, can avoid a lot of confusion and issues with members in the group. Um, I hope that answers your question. We'll talk a little bit more about we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So if you still have questions regarding that, or if you want to clarify anything or looking for a little bit more clarification, just let me know. We'll talk a little bit more about what those sort of agreements look like, and I even have a handout for you guys. So bear with me if I didn't answer your question. Maybe I can answer it after we're done with the presentation, or maybe it might get answered in the next few slides. So I apologize, but hopefully that makes things a little bit more clear. So I'm sorry about that. So remember that you are not your writing, and that your first drafts will never be good. No, of course, no problem. Your first drafts are not something that you should base your skills off of. Practice makes perfect, and you shouldn't be comparing yourself to your writing group, because you're all different and you all work differently. So you also want to listen to feedback that you get and revise. That feedback is not meant to hurt you, it is meant to help you. So listening can help you learn how people might view your work in a different way. It's a bit more objective, right, when you get feedback from others rather than maybe even your mentors or professors. So applying feedback and help that you got to identify patterns in your own work can be very helpful to you, not only on a grander scale, but of course on a piece-by-piece basis. You can improve your own writing when you're listening to this feedback, as well as the quality of your feedback if you constantly practice within a group. And it's just a kind of a win for everybody. Just remember to revise as soon as possible and revise often. And if you're stuck with revision, of course, you can always ask your group for help, right? While these groups tend to focus on, writing that's already happened or giving feedback on a piece of writing, if you're in the process of revising, you can always ask your group for help and see what they have to say. But finally, don't forget to give as well as take. No one likes an energy vampire, and your peers are spending their own time to help you improve your writing, and you should do the same for them. So that's a big one. If you're joining a writing group, remember it is not just for your improvement, it is for everybody's improvement. So you have to be willing to put in as much as you take out of the group. Just share the wealth. So a little bit of what I was talking about with the question that was asked in the chat. We're going to talk now about things that you should consider before joining a writing group, and things that you might want to make clear with everyone before you join a writing group or meet for the first time. In our course shell on Web Campus, under modules, under today's date, you will see that there is the space for this workshop. Not only will you find this PowerPoint, you will find 2 handouts. The first is a list of questions, more than the ones that we have here on this slide, which I'll talk about in a second, that you want to consider before setting up your first meeting. It's very detailed, things that you might not know the answer from, things that you might have to ask your members, of course, that all of you should be on the same page about. It's a very detailed list of 13, I think, questions that you might want to have answered, or that you should probably have answered before your first meeting. The second handout is actually a more individual handout. It's for you as a person. It's to take stock of your own personal preferences as a writer. This might help you decide what kind of writing group might work best for you and what kind of environment you might want to work in. So the first one is just how to join or how to set up writing groups handout. The second one is titled Writing Inventory. So the first handout, like I said, is about 13 questions that you should look at before starting a writing group. And the second one is more on an individual basis on how you as a writer may prefer to work, or things that you might prefer to focus on, or what kind of group you might want to join. But with those, we have this slide. So this slide is talking a little bit about what you might consider before joining a writing group. So writers should determine their goals and needs for a writing group prior to joining to ensure that they get the most out of their experience. To do that, you might want to ask yourself these questions. Now remember, while the goal of a writing group is to improve everybody's work, you still need it to be a place that is comfortable for you. So how do we decide that? We look at questions like this. Does the writer, meaning you, need feedback for your completed work? You may want to consider joining a feedback or a hybrid group in that case. Also, what kind of feedback do you see yourself needing? If you're a person that really responds to other people's feedback, then a feedback or a hybrid group might be the perfect kind of setup for you. Do you have time to meet regularly, right? A writing group is a commitment, both in time and energy. Feedback and hybrid groups especially require more from you and your group members because you are giving personalized feedback to those writers. Is this something that you can commit to, right? Is a writing group something that you have the time for? Finally, what are your ultimate goals for yourself and for the group? Are you just looking for motivation and inspiration? Then maybe an accountability group is best for you. If you're expecting personalized feedback, perhaps a hybrid or feedback group is best, right? So if you feel yourself just needing that extra push or having deadlines to meet, then maybe an accountability group is better for you. Or if you feel yourself just needing more feedback from others, then of course, maybe a hybrid or a feedback group is best for you. Now, some things that you want to talk about when it comes to your first meeting. As a part of your boot camp experience, so of course what you guys are doing right now, you are required to attend at least 3 of the 6 scheduled meetings throughout the semester, which are at the bottoms of the modules page. You can use these times to meet up with your prearranged group or work with other members of your cohort. The dates for these meetups are posted, of course, in our Canvas shell. And when you have gathered your cohort for regular group meetings, there are a few steps you want to take before the writing sessions. So things that you want to determine. So this might be, again, something else that you want to talk about in relation to the question that was asked in the chat. So things that you want to set up before you even meet or before the first meeting happens. You want to know where, when, how often you'll meet with your group. So are you meeting weekly, bi-weekly, on rotating locations, on neutral ground like campus? Are you meeting virtually in the case of what's currently going on? And other things you should consider, you should also decide how members will communicate between meetings. Will you start an email chain for submissions? Are you going to have a group chat? Will you share documents via Google Docs or things like that? What kinds of writing are acceptable for submission to a feedback or hybrid group? Meaning things that, what do you find acceptable? Do you find a partial draft acceptable? Are brainstorms okay? Outlines? Are there any length requirements? Do you only want people to submit 5 pages of work or 20, depending on how much time you give each session? It's also important to discuss how members can safely voice their concerns if the group is not meeting the individual needs of members. Now, this is the hard part. You have to remember that egos and thick skin can be detrimental to the productivity of a group. If there's a problem, address it cleanly and move on. If you're not getting the best or what you expected out of the group, then you should feel comfortable enough to leave. Finally, you should set a permanent schedule early. Schedule the upcoming meetings ahead of time, including where and when to meet next. You want to make sure that everybody is on the same page about when, where, and how you'll meet. Especially if you can get these planned out a few ahead of time and always remind people at the end of each meeting, then hopefully you avoid confusion about when, where, and who is speaking at the next meeting or who's talking and how much time they'll get, things like that. So not only that, there's some other things you might want to consider for your first meeting. Writers forming a writing group, you need to determine whether you want to create an accountability, feedback, or hybrid group, right? So deciding what sort of group you want to belong to. and what kind of group this will be. Again, this is something that should be agreed upon before your first meeting, and ensure that each group member understands what role they will play in their first meeting. So when forming a group that requires feedback, you should determine early the rotation of submission, how often, the length limitations, so that everyone is on the same page. You might want to, again, make it clear about how you will break down the first meeting, of how much time will be devoted to each submission, things like that. Who will go, obviously, who will go first. Each member should discuss their own personal and group goals, as well as give a brief overview of any upcoming or ongoing writing projects they may be focusing on. So you want to let your group know what's coming at them, right? You don't just want to submit 20 pages of something and be like, hey, look at this. You might want to give them some context. You might want to tell them, oh, this is part of my thesis or my dissertation. This is an article I'm working on. This is a conference paper. This is just a piece of creative work, because all of those things will have different conventions or different expectations that need to be met. Your thesis and dissertation is a far cry for most people than a piece of creative work or an article that you're trying to publish. A conference presentation is different from an article that you're trying to publish. Everything works differently. So giving your group some context and whatever kind of goals that you hope to achieve with that next meeting is always helpful. So some of the last few things we'll talk about when it comes to other group matters, now that you've talked about a setup, what kind of group that you're a part of, as well as how you want to approach each group, is determining a regular meeting agenda, which again should kind of be set up from the start. You want to stick to it. You want to spend time with your group agreeing on a submission schedule and rotation if you are part of a feedback or hybrid group. You want to continuously make sure that everybody is on the same page about how regularly you will meet and how regularly you will submit things and who is submitting what, when, and giving them that context. And then at the end of each meeting, each writer should determine their personal writing goals to be accomplished before the next meeting, and the group should hold them accountable. So if you're talking to one of your friends in the group and they say, oh, I really need to get the next 10 pages of my thesis written before our next group, then you might want to be that motivation for them and say, okay, I'm expecting 10 pages from you next time we meet. And maybe if you talk outside of the group, you might want to be like, hey, how are those 10 pages going, right? But at the end of each meeting, you should set those goals for your next group. So that way you have a deadline and you know exactly what to expect going into your next meeting. The last thing that I want to talk about are the downfalls of writing groups. We spent this whole time talking about benefits and how to get the most out of a writing group. There are some things that you should probably look at regardless of the benefits. So those studies show that writing groups can be hugely beneficial to the writing process. There are clear and obvious ways that they can go wrong. So it's important to know that it's important to note these things and discuss them with your group to determine ways to avoid negative outcomes. For instance, often when several people work together, egos tend to get in the way of productivity. We've all been in a terrible group project or discussing ways to avoid, people that you don't like to work with. That's not something you really want to have in a writing group. If you're not comfortable, of course, there are other ways or other groups that you may want to join. But discussing ways to avoid this, meaning egos or uncomfortability early, may help you avoid any sort of tension. So if there's something that happens in the group that makes you feel uncomfortable, try to address it as clearly and cleanly and as early as possible. Another sign of downfall, many people are idealistic when they agree to meet for a writing group, but time reveals a lack of commitment. The group should come to an agreement early, as each group member, especially in feedback and hybrid groups, rely on group members to do extra work. So you want to make sure that that person is committed to giving feedback, committed to meeting. You want to make sure everybody is on the same page and has the time to meet. Now, sometimes it isn't necessarily a lack of commitment, but rather a lack of time. Schedules change, but it's important to prepare the group for that, possibly before it happens. So if you know that you have to work different shifts or you have new class meetings for a new semester, make sure that your group can grow and change with that, and that you work with everybody's schedule. Do not expect everybody to adapt just to yours. You have to work with everyone. Writing is very personal for many of us, so tempers tend to flare when people are exposed or vulnerable, something very likely to happen when sharing work. It's important to have a plan for when emotions start to dictate how the meeting is going. So if somebody is sharing a very personal creative piece, you might want to give them, or you might want to give the rest of your group a heads up, or try to approach it with as much delicacy as possible. If there's an unclear hierarchy in the group or one that the group did not agree to, problems can also arise. It's important to determine early if there will be a hierarchy and what it is, or who is at the top, before the hierarchy starts to become a question. So if somebody is leading the group, you want to make sure that leader is known. Working with different people means working with people with different skill sets. So creating roles for each person and identifying exactly what that group needs will help you curb unexpected complications. So if somebody is better at time management or organizing notes or things like that, you might want to ask people what they're more comfortable with or what they feel like they excel at. And finally, your group could just be a poor fit. Perhaps the style of the group or the collective voice isn't productive, and it's important to have a contingency plan if this happens. So don't feel like you have to be stuck or constantly with the same group. You can move, you can meet with other people, or you can even meet with some of our campus resources, which we have here. Now, I know some of you will see these people or have already heard from these people through the rest of boot camp, but of course, campus resources for you to approach. You can utilize UNLV libraries to help find a research librarian if you're stuck on a specific topic. You have us at the Writing Center for consultations, which I will go over in a second on how to set one of those up if you guys are interested. And we have the Writing Center also offers graduate workshops, much like this one. Even now, as we're going virtual, we do have workshops. The Graduate College, of course, also has their workshops, which I'm sure you know since you are sitting in a boot camp for the Graduate College. Of course, if you're struggling with something like your thesis or dissertation, please make use of your professor's office hours, especially for your mentor or your committee chair. And then we have peer writing groups, much like what we just did. What we just talked about. So you can check Canvas courses for writing group, meetup dates. If you want to set one up, of course, please, contact your peers through Canvas or anybody that you feel comfortable with, maybe some of your friends from other disciplines as well. Here, if you're looking for any other sort of help or scholarly sort of information on writing groups, you can find some information in these articles. So we have citations and additional readings for those of you who are interested in reading up on some of the scholarly benefits of writing groups, which here on the slide. And then I do want to leave this or ask you right now if anybody has any sort of questions, comments, concerns, things like that. I would love to know if there's anything that you need me to clear up currently. If there is, or if there isn't, I'll give you guys some more time if any of you are typing in the chat. So how can we initiate a writing group? So the easiest way to initiate a writing group is just to talk to people that you're comfortable with or talk to a peer. I know you guys are in this grad boot camp right now, so maybe you're meeting some new friends, or you have people that you already work well with, or people in your major that you meet up with regularly. You just approach them and be like, hey, if you're struggling meeting any sort of deadlines, or if you want to work together. I see it as no different than telling like your friend that you want to meet up at the library and be like, hey, do you want to study together? But this time it would be a little bit more regimented, a little bit more, consistent. So of course you would have to go over those sort of, commitment times with them and be like, hey, like I'm genuinely thinking about starting this group where we meet regularly and this is what we're going to do. So you'd have to lay it all clearly for them, but it's just something you approach people you'd feel comfortable with, or even people that you would really, really want to work with or have feedback from. So I see it no different than sort of just approaching somebody and being like, hey, do you want to study together? But of course, you do have to lay out the sort of commitment that comes with that. Cool, hold on. So I'm not sure if you talked about the size of the group. I did not talk about sizes. I think it's whatever you feel comfortable with. There was mention of having like an 8-person group sort of being like the one that is the most comfortable to rotate consistently, meaning that 2 people would go every session. So people are getting sessions every 4 weeks or something like that. But I think that's up to you. And if you have to break up into smaller groups, for each session, that's fine. And then you want to meet as a larger group, that's also okay. I think it just depends on how many people you feel comfortable working with at the time and what is the most kind of productive environment for all of those involved. So if it's, only 4 of you that want to meet in a closer session, but the group is 8, so then you'll have 2 sort of closed sessions of 4 people talking about feedback or having that writing session, and then maybe you come together and plan time for all 8 of you to come and talk together. I think it just depends on what works comfortably for everyone involved, or what you feel like is the better environment. Where can I find all of the resource material, for example, any template related? So this PowerPoint, of course, we have the breakdowns on each slide of different types of groups. You can find this under the modules as under 2 kinds of writing groups and how to start them. And you will also find the handouts that I referenced earlier. So this PowerPoint has those outlines of what a meeting might look like, but also those handouts really kind of give you an idea of how to construct the kinds of questions that you might ask people when trying to form a writing group. So questions that you might need to set up. Benefits of creating a writing group of different disciplines. I thought it was not the best type of, so the best, I found it's a lot easier talking to people who have no idea of what I've been studying, because they give me such a fresh perspective and they'll ask me questions that I might not think about. So if you're talking to somebody, like for me, I was an English major and I have a really good friend who's in psychology, and I'll be talking about an English aspect and she would ask me questions being like, oh, what does that mean? Or, oh, can you tell me a little bit more of that? You'll find yourself needing to explain this to somebody, and you might need to add that explanation to your writing depending on who your audience is, right? So if you're trying to get something published in a more general academic setting, then you might need to explain a bit more, and having people who aren't constantly in your head or knowing the same kinds of things that you know is beneficial to you being able to explain those things or knowing what you might need to explain to other people. So having other people from different disciplines is really beneficial to, kind of getting out of your own head and seeing how much you might need to explain more or further for them. Any other questions? Of course. I do want to note, you guys can keep asking questions in the chat, but I do want to note that unfortunately, the Writing Center is not open currently, but we do open at the beginning of the semester. Everything is virtual. So these are all of our in-person hours from a previous semester. So we won't be following these, but you can actually go to our website, which is writingcenter.unlv.edu, and you can find all of our information about the kinds of virtual consultations and virtual amenities that we will be providing to the UNLV community. So if you have any questions about that, please visit our website. There you can also find a bunch of handouts and other resources, as well as our workshop schedules and some information regarding our workshops. You can find it all there at our website. Or if you're looking for some, oh, here's our website, sorry. If you're looking for other things, you can say resources. And then finally, if you want some funny writing memes or want some more information about the Writing Center to stay a little bit more up to date, you can follow us on social media. And please do, because there are actually some pretty funny and neat things that we talk about. So yeah, thank you guys so much. And if there's any more questions, I'd love to talk about it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us today, Emily. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to post this workshop recording on the Graduate College YouTube channel, and we'll share the links with you all. But other than that, have a great rest of your day.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.